know that.
Yeah, TrekCulture's been going for 5 years now. We had our anniversary back in February.
So, what is TrekCulture?
TrekCulture is a place for reviews.
It's a way to talk to other Star Trek fans about what we love.
It's a YouTube channel about Star Trek.
Analysis, healthy and friendly debates and discussions.
And then there's episodes like this.
It's a place where I'm constantly having to justify why JC should have been canon.
Well, if you read the comments people leave us, TrekCulture is why Paramount pay me the big bucks. Don't tell Sean.
Hi, I'm Duncan Rillick, no relation, and by now you know I collect relics from before the burn. From the halls of Kronos to the alleys of Nivar, I try to get my relic news out there, but Starfleet has started to geo-block my work. Thankfully, Surfshark is here to help. If you head to the link in the description of this video, you'll be able to see what Starfleet doesn't want you to know. Surfshark VPN can help you gain access to over 3,200 different servers, and with over 100 different locations, helping you stay ahead of the geo-blocking that keeps me from giving the relic news to you. Surfshark VPN also keeps you safe from those suspicious Federation Section 31 bugged public Wi-Fi networks, so you can browse my content with pure peace of mind. Go to the link in the description of this video and use TrekCulture at checkout to get four extra months free with purchase. That plus a 30-day money-back guarantee and 24/7 support service lets you know you're in safe hands with Surfshark. Sign up today and you can be part of the Relic Club with me, Duncan Rillick. Remember, if it ain't a relic, it ain't a relic. No relation.
Thanks to the Freedom of Information Act circa mid-23rd century, we get to watch What is Starfleet, the documentary that has been made by Beto Ortegas, who is of course a brother of Erica Ortegas. Now we saw some of these, some of the footage for this being filmed earlier in the season, or did we? We certainly saw Beto doing his job earlier on in the season. Or did we? There's a little bit of a hold up now about how the footage in this episode is brought together, because there is some reused footage here from earlier bits of Strange New Worlds. I want to come in with an up first of all. It's the idea of doing a documentary. Star Trek is not the first franchise to do an episode that is presented as a documentary. I mean, the first one that jumps to mind for me is Stargate SG-1 Heroes, which I think was a supremely well-made set of episodes. Now, it was different again because that was showing you the process of making the documentary, whereas here it is presented as if we are watching the documentary. Battlestar Galactica Final Cut, bit similar to Stargate SG-1 as well. And I know that this format has been used in other sci-fi properties too. Where Strange New Worlds is different is that when we hit play on this episode, assumedly we are watching What is Starfleet, the documentary. It's a really interesting idea, and it's certainly the latest idea in Strange New Worlds' episodic take on Star Trek, and they're trying new things with the format. We've spoken several times on the channel before how we do like that they are doing different things. For example, look at the musical, look at those old scientists. And although I'm aware I didn't give it a glowing review, A Space Adventure Hour was another example of trying something new, which, by the way, featured the fictional show The Last Frontier, not, as I called it about 27 times in the ups and downs, A Space Adventure Hour, so my bad on that one. This documentary, as made by Umberto, seems to be posing the question, what exactly is Starfleet? Clues in the name there, Sean. But what is Starfleet? What is its impact in the Alpha and Beta quadrants? And what is its legacy, if you like? And although this is being tackled from quite early on in our understanding of Starfleet history, this is being made in the early 2260s, which is still before Kirk took command of the Enterprise, there is also still 60 years of Star Trek history. So the idea of a documentary like this is very interesting because, again, that question of, most of the time, our viewpoint characters are Starfleet officers. So what does Starfleet look like to someone who is not a member of Starfleet? We have seen Starfleet compared to things like the Borg, if we take Michael Eddington's description from For the Uniform. And it's an interesting idea. If we're always on the bridge of the Enterprise, then surely we tend to look at them as the good guys, at least for the most part. This documentary does not set out to paint Starfleet as the good guys. That's interesting because if you see some of the online discourse, certainly over the last few years, it expands on that Eddington idea of, is Starfleet actually good? Or are they a colonizing force? What is the cost of joining Starfleet? Is it the loss of one's cultural identity? That question goes back as far as the Next Generation. Oftentimes Worf would find himself coming up against this kind of barrier. He was able to wear his baldric, but when it came to Klingon rituals, they weren't so welcome on the flagship of the Federation. Star Trek Deep Space Nine, in fact, tackled the question of joining the Federation more or less head on. If you think about it, the main thrust of that show was the process of Bajor joining the Federation. And, spoiler I guess if you haven't seen DS9, it does not conclude with Bajor being a member of the Federation. That's a 7-year journey, and although it wasn't always the focus of Deep Space Nine, it certainly was part of the catalyst for everything that came after. So all this to say, an idea of a documentary about what is Starfleet, I think is a fabulous idea, and I do think it's good that they have tackled this. My first down of the episode is Beto Ortegas is not the person to do this. There are a couple of reasons for this. Now, the first is that as a narrator, I don't say that everybody can be a narrator, he's not a great one. He doesn't sound particularly interested in what's happening around him. And if he's going to be our voice of the documentary, as at this stage of the episode he is being presented as the voice of the episode, that's not great. I'm already beginning to lose a little bit of interest there. Quite frankly, he sounds bored in the beginning, and that's our introduction to his documentary. To really, I guess, understand why he's the wrong person to do this, I sort of have to jump to the end of the episode. So I hope you'll forgive me, but I assume everyone who's watching the ups and downs has watched the episode first, or at least doesn't mind me talking about things a little bit out of order. I know my editor does mind that, and Eddie, I'm very sorry, but never mind footage for a second. I just want to talk about the reveal, if you like, that Beto has. He has underlying reasons for doing this, and that they become more and more apparent as it goes on. My issue, if you like, with the footage that we see in the beginning of this episode, for example, think Pike standing on the bridge saying, "Trust me, you do not want the Federation as your enemy." This is intercut with some reused footage and some explosions, some red shirts go flying. Remember, we're supposed to be watching the final edit of this documentary. Instead, what we get in this episode is Beto Ortegas' journey from where he begins with his understanding of Starfleet and how he feels about Starfleet to where he lands by the episode's end. And because this is all framed as the documentary, What is Starfleet, that we're watching, what we then get is not a documentary about Starfleet. We get a documentary following this young first-year filmmaker and his, maybe not growth, but settling into what Starfleet is. That's a problem. And the reason that's a problem is that context, which should be important, and recontextualizing scenes, we don't get that. What we get is an episode of Strange New Worlds that does tell a story, more or less, but it doesn't do much for the overall universe of Strange New Worlds. It doesn't do anything for Starfleet. And instead, if you like, it gives us a little bit more understanding of this one character. But if that's our documentary episode, that's not good. Now, let's jump in a little bit more. So, my second down, this is, as I said, it's less a documentary and more of a hit piece. The footage chosen in the beginning of this documentary is obviously very deliberately designed to make Starfleet look even more militaristic than it actually is. And it is a military. Now, it is a military that is focused on exploration generally, but it is a military. Beto Ortegas describes Starfleet as colonizers once or twice in this episode, and it's not hard to see how he gets to that conclusion. Again, all you need to be is an enemy of Starfleet to sort of side with him here, but it's coming from a place of antagonism. It's not coming from a place of examination. The subjective voice is often very present in documentaries. Let's be real. I'm sure we can all think of documentaries off the top of our head which are not told in an objective way. That obviously there is a bias going in, and that itself is not the greatest crime, as long as they advertise it for what it is. I'm a great proponent for be honest about what something is, be upfront about it. This episode isn't. This episode, I've two issues there. One is that this documentary is not honest about what it's trying to do, so that would be one problem. The second thing is that this is, first and foremost, and you would argue quite obviously, an episode of Strange New Worlds. And what I mean by that is it also generally follows the structure of an episode of Strange New Worlds. You have your intro, you have your main body, and you have your effective denouement at the end. It's not different enough to be a documentary. So there's your second issue. It is effectively misleading you into thinking you're watching a documentary when you aren't. And if I'm, again, being kind about it, well, Sean, it is an episode of Strange New Worlds. What is your problem? I understand the question as well. I think part of my frustration here is that there is a really exciting idea of doing a documentary in universe that I don't think was captured very well. I think that was squandered a little bit this week. There's also the fact that you could easily put together a documentary using existing footage from Star Trek. So at this point in the timeline, you really would be relying on footage from Discovery and Enterprise. Not using that kind of footage, for me, hurts the story that they're trying to tell, because even if you wanted to go with just the militaristic route, using footage, particularly from Enterprise, would have not only tied Strange New Worlds into Enterprise a little bit more tightly, but also there's probably many examples where Enterprise would prove what Beto assumes about Starfleet. And as we go on and we see how widespread the recording on board Enterprise is, we are never given the answer, is this installed for this documentary or is this standard issue on Starfleet ships? If it's standard issue on Starfleet ships, presumably via this Freedom of Information Act, you could have had access to an awful lot more footage. Instead, we just watch an episode of Star Trek. Compare this episode to the pilot. So the pilot, Strange New Worlds, you see Pike break the Prime Directive, bring the Enterprise down into a low planetary orbit, and effectively threaten the two rival factions on the planet of Kylie into a peace treaty. When we speak then about the Lutani and about the Khazar and their conflict, we don't get anything like that in this episode. But I will go on and speak a little bit more about that as the episode goes on. My next down for the episode, and it's sort of an expansion on some of the things I've spoken about already, but it never feels like we're watching a documentary. For example, the footage is far too crisp. We are watching footage being captured by the same cameras that film the rest of Strange New Worlds. Because even when we're supposed to be watching through the footage captured by Beto's drones, which have been shown previously in the season to be able to hover it whatever way they like, but also they're on a gimbal. I mean, we should be effectively watching a Steadicam. And instead they try and go for this handheld footage kind of feeling, but that doesn't really come across and also doesn't really make sense based on what we're watching. But as I say, the footage is far too crisp. It doesn't look rough. It doesn't look like guerrilla filmmaking. It doesn't look like a documentary. It looks as though this is the highest budget documentary that has ever happened. For example, think of the musical cues. No, it is not the first documentary to ever have music, and I would never suggest that it is. But I like the fact that they were able to secure the same composer that does the music for Strange New Worlds for their documentary as well, because that is absolutely standard episode quality music in here. And again, you have this issue of, am I watching a documentary or am I watching an episode of Star Trek that they have put a filter over several scenes? Have they just put a frame around some of the footage? Particularly the footage you see captured, from bridge cam, view screen cam, shuttle cam. It's all that sort of same type of, you have the edge on it. And it never, actually on the word edge, it never feels like there's an edge to it. Nothing that we are watching this week feels particularly different from another episode. The only thing really, I guess, being different is the talking heads segments. The talking head segments are often lit a little bit different, not terribly differently, but they are lit a little bit differently, enough to sort of let us know that it's a bit different. You have the actors looking straight down the lens, which is generally not done in Star Trek. I mean, there's many examples of it, but it's not the done thing in Star Trek. We do get manipulation. Now, that itself is not an up or a down. This is something we spoke about in our What the Hell video as well. This is a very manipulative episode, as documentaries often are. By which I mean, look at how each of the characters are presented, particularly in their talking heads sections. You have Pike, full uniform for the most part, being presented as this captain who doesn't really want to speak. Everything is classified. He doesn't want to talk about it. Spock is fairly open, in fact, surprisingly open when he speaks about his childhood on Vulcan. La'an is pretty much what we would expect her to be. But actually, to be fair, one of the things I like about La'an in this episode is it sort of continues her trend of softening overall through season 3. Not that she gives Beto a hug and says, "Come through, my friend, let us have tea." No, nothing like that. But she's open to these interviews. Whereas in seasons 1 and even season 2, she might have been a bit more like, I don't have time for this. I've got my job to do. This is obviously intercut then with footage of her using the firing range. Erica, who is shown as a bit of a grease monkey with all of this equipment in her quarters, she is very resistant to the idea of doing a documentary. You kind of get the feeling that there's a bit of a, little bro, leave me alone. But also we know that Erica is also going through some PTSD from her encounter with the Gorn earlier on this season. And although it doesn't really linger on that in this episode, it is nice to see it touched on. Even questions like, how's your hand? Beto's story, Beto's journey, it tends to focus a little bit more on that, whereas Erica's doesn't. When I say manipulative then, all of that aside, Uhura, she is presented as generally the only one in civvies. She is the bright, fresh-faced ensign. She is ready to talk about her friend, and she is also the one who has a relationship with Beto prior to this episode. That's what I mean about the manipulation. We as an audience, we go in knowing that, so we can see what's happening here, that he has obviously chosen her to be the interviewee that he thinks he will get furthest with. When later on there's a scene where he really thinks he's going to get something out of her, it's clearly set up that she will be the one to either take his side or to really give him the nugget that he wants. I think that's quite clever, the way that they've done that in this episode. It plays very much on knowing the two characters as we do, and it pays off a bit of their relationship throughout the season. Other than that, I think we're struggling a little bit with the fact that, I mentioned the fact that everything is pretty high quality. I mean, frankly, the cameras are cinematic quality that he's using for this documentary because we're watching footage that was filmed for Strange New Worlds. But it all looks staged. Again, as I say, at no point does it feel like I'm watching somebody hoping to catch footage. This is somebody who knew there was going to be footage, set up his cameras and filmed it. You know what I mean? So it's all still in the same down. Sorry, you're kind of like, Sean, we're about 27 minutes into this video. Are you going to get through it or what? I am going to get through it, but I do want to really... And I want to give credit to particularly Chris here, but also to people who make documentaries. The cinema verite, or for example, the handheld, rough and ready way of filming. The cinema verite should not feature so much controlled mise-en-scène. It should not feel like we're walking onto a soundstage to film this documentary. Now, in the real world, you can go like, well, Sean, you didn't really think that they filmed this in space. And no, I would love it to be that case, but no, I'm aware they did not film this in space. No, they filmed it on the Enterprise on Earth. But they didn't go far enough. It doesn't feel like a proper documentary. Everything feels staged, it feels learned. It feels prepared. There's no handheld feeling at all here. I do want to give an up, as I mentioned it, like so some of that lighting changes during the talking head section, like that is a bit of an up, but down is to that wireframe intro card. Listen, I'm saying this as a YouTuber, this looks like something you'd see on YouTube. And if this is supposed to be the documentary about Starfleet commissioned by Starfleet, As we go through some of those talking head segments, you get La'an talking about what Starfleet means to her. You get Spock saying that it gave him the opportunity to explore some of his human side. We see Pike talking about, what does it mean to be a Starfleet officer? It means to obey orders. That's one of the first things he says. In the oath, it's one of the first things you swear an oath to do. There is a through line of being able to handle and carry out your orders, even when you don't like them. Whether or not you believe in the mission is a big, big, big theme of this week's episode. Erica is annoyed by Beto and she gives no comment. Spock takes this opportunity to speak about how on Vulcan his human half was shunned by others, that he lost a childhood friend, Sobrek, because of his half-human side, which led to self-harm. And it's almost flippantly dark. But in Spock's exploration of his emotional side, as we've seen quite a lot of this season, it is sort of on track as well for what I think he would talk about. La'an speaks about sometimes, as part of Starfleet, you attack first. And this, of course, is a big nod back to earlier happenings in Discovery. But it's a bit like, Erica talks about, yes, sometimes you need weapons, but the point is don't go out unarmed, but hopefully you won't need to use your weapons. This ties back into the extreme militaristic view on Starfleet that this part of the episode seems to be focusing on. I do want to give an up, first of all. Yes, I remember the ups exist, but I do want to give an up to Uhura's personalized comm badge. It does fall back into, Uhura is the most innocent whoever innocent as she's presented in this episode. But also, again, a nice continuation of something introduced in Star Trek Discovery, but something I really like this anyway as an idea that your comm badge would be personalized. We get our interview as well with Una, that she talks about her role as first officer is to support the captain and offer alternatives, but not challenge orders. Again, something we saw earlier in the season between Ortegas and herself when she was in command, but Rebecca Romaine actually is very strong. She doesn't get an awful lot to do this week, but what she does, she is very, very good with. A message comes up on screen that says Lutani 7 has been attacked by a neighboring world, Khazar. Lutani has faced 9 million casualties, while Khazar has only lost 119,000. Something Star Trek has done since its earliest days is take the lens, turn it around, and look back on the world. So it's not at all a crime here that basically Star Trek is doing this. Hey, do you see yourselves? Do you see the world? What it doesn't do is specify, and I think that's very important to point out for a couple of reasons. One is that I believe, probably, as I'm filming this right now, people are already saying it is definitely one thing, it is definitely another thing. One could assume that it was written a while ago, so it could be a reference to Ukraine-Russia. It could be a reference to Israel-Palestine. It could be a reference to both of those things or to neither of those things. For another example, I take the Cardassian occupation of Bajor. Yes, there are many real-world parallels that inspired the Bajoran resistance movement, the Cardassian occupation, but the makers of that show also were quick to point out that while things like Palestine, for example, played a large inspiration in that, it was a sort of a conglomeration of a few different atrocities throughout history. I think that is important to bear that in mind here, because I know this is going to be an episode that's going to be discussed rather a lot in terms of a lot of passion. I have a down here, Litani 7 and Khazar are obviously referencing several, very up-to-date things happening in the world, but it's a little bit unclear, and especially Starfleet's role here as well. It muddies it even further. I do want to say I like when Star Trek comments on the real world. As I say, go back through Star Trek and you will see comments since day one, right? It's a little bit muddled. It's a little bit muddled in this episode, and because of that, I think it hurts the overall message of presumably what they were trying to do, and then some things that happen later on in the episode as well. It's a bit, what was the aim here? Because it doesn't really, in my opinion, it doesn't leave you by the end in a position of, well, you can interpret it whatever way that you like, because Starfleet is sort of shoved into the middle of things, doesn't do very much, upsets the balance, and then buggers off. I mean, yeah, okay, what's the message here? Because this is now our introduced dilemma of the week, and it is quite interesting, I will say that. I mean, I meant what I said earlier on. What it does then is it leads to the fact that down, we don't use any footage from the earlier in the season. We saw Beto filming at the wedding/centennial. We saw Beto filming in Through the Lens of Time. None of that footage is used in this episode. In fact, we get reused footage from seasons 1 and 2. So it's a bit, alright, bit of a wasted opportunity there. Where's the B-roll footage? Where's profile shots of the different characters? Anything about the Vesta? Anything about Q Jr. or Trelane or whatever you want to call him? None of that is in here. So what have you been doing this whole season, Beto? You were commissioned to make this documentary. Why did you leave it all to the last minute? Because I tell you what, brother, it shows that you left it all to the last minute. It is an up from me that we are tackling something, galactically big like this, but also how it's presented, for the most part, in the ready room, which is most definitely called a ready room now, because it was like, it is the ready room, it's also the observation lounge. Is it the ready observation lounge room? Anyway, ready room, thanks to the monitors on the wall. Basically, Pike's answer to everything is it's classified. It's classified. It's classified. So you do get a sense of Pike, in particular, is between a rock and a hard place here. Obviously highlighted by the scene with the redacted orders from, presumably the Admiral, could be April, could be anyone, and him pushing back. And he does push back on his orders, but at the end of the day, he's a captain of a ship, he has a job to do, and his crew's job is to follow his orders. It's frustrating, but it feels quite realistic. A lot of the time, and all Star Trek is like this, but a lot of the time it's a bit like the captain gives an order, now everyone let's sit down and have a chat about how we feel about the order, and we don't have time for that. This is something actually this season has been pretty good for, finding that balance between you have a job to do and, we're not trying to shatter your mental health, but you got to do your job. I do also like little character moments. Oh, Spock just handing La'an a coffee. I like that, I really do. It's so small, nobody comments on it, but that works for me. We had an odd moment there where in the ready room, remember, we're watching this through Ortegas's camera. This camera, we have seen it pan from character to character, we've seen it zoom in, and suddenly it pans, and it cuts back to Spock. So alright, that means, remember, we're watching a finished documentary here. Ortegas decided that there would be an edit point there. Why? Things like that, they do stand out because I want to be sold, I want to be in this episode, I want to be a part of proceedings, but I am being taken out by little things like this. This scene leads to things like Erica in the turbolift going, we are bringing supplies, they're going to a war zone, what do you think we're doing? Uhura saying, that's above my orders. Again, she's presented as, the most innocent person, whoever innocent ever. And it is, it's obviously manipulative, but it's well done. That is an up from me, as is the introduction of the Jikaru. This beautiful, beautiful design of this effectively space moth, but it's both seafaring and spacefaring. It's gorgeous. I have to all credit where credit is due. That's a beautiful design. And Tychus B itself, this, if it's not an ocean world, it's still got some gorgeous oceans, and it's surrounded by a shield. That is beautiful. How on earth Beto got that footage, I don't know, but I find that less egregious because we know he's using Enterprise computers as well for, recording things. So it's just a stunning reveal as it comes up out of the water, and you feel that awe and wonder. You also then see Spock is somewhat connected to this. It's just a couple of glances. It's good, it's subtle, and I like that. And then you have the Lutani ship comes up and starts firing at it, and we get the first reveal of, oh, it's got power. This whole scene for me is good. This works for me. That is an up. I also really like the conversation between Spock and Uhura on the bridge as well. This is probably, this and Pike and Una in the Ready Room are probably the two most gorilla-y in terms of footage that it sounds like we get. Those are the two scenes that feel the most gorilla-y of the whole episode, really. I do have to say down because there seems to be glitch for glitch's sake here. And that to me just says, oh, it's a hologram, ergo it must flicker. It's like, oh, you're watching footage, ergo it must glitch. Things like that they're clearly a stylistic choice and they're not needed. Down in sickbay, we see this Lutani doctor who is the one who was firing on the Jinkaru, and that's obviously going to lead to a bit of a reveal, but also down, we're gonna really focus on this screen that says flatlined. She's definitely dead. All right, we got it. We got that she was dead. This is not an episode that's going for subtlety very, very much. This scene, though, introduces this idea that we know the Enterprise is there to help the Lutani, and there has been, objections raised to this, as Ortega says, the Lutani were working with the Klingons at one point as well. So why are we working with them, and why is this Lutani firing on what is technically their own livestock, as Spock calls the Jikaru earlier on? To me, this is clearly meant to see that even in this one belligerent side, there is discord in the camp, and this leads again to the muddled messaging of this episode. Who are we to sympathize with? Who are we to empathize with? Who are we to do neither of those with? We don't meet any Khazar in this episode, and not that I think that we need to, but that means, all right, we're the Lutani, that's it, we're gonna focus on them. And we see two different types. One is trying to destroy the Jikaru, and the other one is trying to use it as a great weapon. Meanwhile, Starfleet is here, and as we see in Pike's half of the conversation with Starfleet, they're not going anywhere. We don't know what the Lutani have on them. That Starfleet is so determined to help, is so determined to make sure that they get their giant weapon, and is so determined to stay involved and, not kind of, oh, what's happening? The reason I do that is this feels like a bit of a heavy-handed message about some of the things going on in the world and how other forces get involved in conflicts. Trying to show Starfleet's point of view versus the point of view of Starfleet officers, for me, doesn't land. Because we don't ever hear what Starfleet Command says, it's redacted. So we only see what the people on the ground have to do. And I suppose jumping to the end a little bit, when Pike eventually comes around and says that he will stop the Lutani from ever using the Jinkaru or the Jinkaru's children again as weapons, this is framed as something that will, annoy Starfleet, but they came around to my way of thinking. Did they? Did they really? Are we ever going to talk about this again? Because it seems like it was so classified and so important, it could not be released even with the Freedom of Information Act that this documentary is released under. And yet, are we to believe that Starfleet were not aware of the fact the Jikaru were sentient to the point where they could feel pain? The episode does not address any of these questions. None of them at all. And it's a mess. Going back into the positives, as he usually is, Babs Oluson-McCann is great in this episode. He has some of the most interesting talking heads moments. As flashes up on screen again, we get a reminder of some of his, less than savory campaigns during the Klingon War. Jigal being, I think, probably the most timely and the darkest, if you like, because we saw Under the Cloak of War, and then again with Shuttle to Kenfori. Yeah, I really like what they do with him, and he doesn't like talking about it. But Beto asks him, have you ever scrubbed sickbay footage? And he says, I don't recall. I don't recall. So obviously we're led to think that if the answer was just no, he would say no. So I don't recall means yes, but I don't want to say it. It's an uncomfortable scene, and it's meant to be uncomfortable, and it works for me. Here we also get the sad reveal as well, that Uhura's friend, who she was at the academy with, was killed when the Cayuga was destroyed by the Gorn over Parnassus Beta. Again, I've spoken to the manipulation that's on show here in the documentary. Celia Rose Gooding absolutely sells it. This scene, it's uncomfortable for different reasons though. This scene highlights more of Beto's bias. He is trying to put her in a scenario where she will side with him. And actually, funnily enough, full disclosure, in my notes, I have this as a down. I am now in the moment changing this to an up. I want to give it the benefit of the doubt to think that this was a deliberate choice, that it wanted to show you Beto effectively being a bit of a git in shanghaiing Uhura like this. And if that was the intention, which I think in thinking about it now, I think it must have been the intention. And for me, then that is an up. Celia is brilliant in this scene. Beto again is sort of going in with that dispassionate voice, and it works. It works, and we get then the stats about the Cayuga going down. It's also a reminder that Marie Patel is shipless at the moment. So when she turns up at the dinner at the end of the episode, there was a bit of everyone was like, oh yeah. Sorry, that was just a funny moment. Nice to see Melanie Scrofano again in the end. There is a funny bit about this though, and this is going to include me reading a little bit, so I hope you'll forgive me for a moment, but the Cayuga apparently was destroyed on Stardate, I think it's 2344.4, and then the events of today, this thing with the Lutani is 2191.1. Why is the number getting lower? Should it not be getting higher? However, I want to read you a quote from Gene Roddenberry himself when asked about how stardates work. This is back from the making of Star Trek. And he said, this time system adjusts for shifts in relative time which occur due to the vessel's speed and space warp capability. It has little relationship to Earth's time as we know it. 1 hour aboard the USS Enterprise at different times may equal as little as 3 Earth hours. The star dates specified in the log entry must be computed against the speed of the vessel, the space warp, and its position within our galaxy in order to give a meaningful reading. He would also then say, I'm not quite sure what I meant by that explanation, but a lot of people have indicated it makes sense. If so, I've been lucky again, and I'd just as soon forget the whole thing before I'm asked any further questions about it. So basically, when asked about Stardate, Gene said, here's an answer, but also, and you know what? Fair enough. There are Stardate calculators online, and I have used quite a few of them, and they all give me different answers as to what the Stardates actually are here. We know it's in the 2260s. Grand. And up, Uhura not reading all the names on the Cayuga when it went down. I think that might seem cold, but think of Ben Sisko in The Pale Moonlight. That as awful as it is, the names begin to blur when you read that many names. It's stark, but it works. We then get our scene with Pike and Una and the redacted transmission from Starfleet, and it's an odd one. Now, never mind the fact that it's redacted from Starfleet, I've talked about that already, but basically Pike's saying we are either to deliver this weapon or take it. I'm going to come back to that one. One overall message, as I say, runs through the episode is, do you believe in the mission? And, answers like, we don't always have to like our orders, but we do have to follow them. It's very Star Trek. That's an up. Now, not that I think I was only following orders ever justifies anything, but just in the context of Star Trek, that really works. La'an, then, as part of one of her talking heads, she's good at her job, and Beto asks her, what makes you good at your job? She's quite logical. Logic! She'd be good for Spock, don't you think? They'd be a good couple. Oh wait, Beckett, here's an up. Overall, the use of cameras inside the consoles aboard the Enterprise is a down from me. It's not that it's the first time we've ever seen surveillance inside a starship, but this widespread. I mean, even you could look up Pike's nostrils from the one on his arm, and it's a bit frightening, really, that level of surveillance. Because think about it, if every starship that followed had this, there'd never be a Maquis again. There'd never be any Badmirals, there'd never be any coups. You might be thinking, isn't all of that a good thing, Sean? Sure, but is there any privacy? You know, this was released by the Freedom of Information Act. Does that mean it's always recording? And only when requested, it's released? Questions like that now need an answer. After the discovery that the Jikaru has the power that it does, and it can send out blasts of radiation that resulted in the death of that Lutani, Uhura and Beto sit in the ready room. And this is when Beto basically reveals his hand. That not only does he have a slant that this documentary is going to be about, he tries to get Uhura on the record to say she disagrees with her orders. Down, not just for that, but for not being immediately reported to the captain, so that the captain is then aware of the fact there is someone on his ship during a time of crisis with an agenda, assembling footage that is not in Starfleet's interests. This, at this point, it's beginning to stretch credulity that he's allowed to film anything else at this point, because also then, if Uhura doesn't report him, that does feel like something she would get pulled up over. So even though in the next scene we see Beto's now in the hallway and he's basically, it feels like it's capturing B-roll, and then we have our mission in the shuttle, Pike is like, I can't believe you're gonna do this, but Spock, Chapel, and Uhura are gonna go on the Galileo to try and communicate with the Jikaru. Thanks very much, Lutani warship, ruining that plan. But why is Beto still allowed to record anything at this point? Surely the ethics of the piece must be immediately called into question. What are they doing here? It is way too messy. It was supposed to be this big reveal moment, and instead, I think what it is the bit where the episode starts to crumble for me. I know you might be thinking, but Sean, you were having such a good time with the episode before now, and you know what? Fair. But I struggled. From this point on with the episode, I must say, I struggled to sort of keep up with the logic they were presenting to me. So even though everything goes a bit wibbly-wobbly on the shuttle, as it was always going to, with the Lutani warship pulling up, and Spock and Chapel are both quite injured by the resulting explosion, this cuts to Pike being asked, have you ever seen anyone die? And he has a good answer. He says, you know, if you had, you will know you don't like being asked about it. But the problem here is the plot armor. Spock could be decapitated, you know he'd be fine, which actually is almost a plot of the original series, so fair enough. But Chapel smashing her head against the console, she's gonna be fine. You have characters in Strange New Worlds, because it's a prequel, who are just, you know they're gonna be okay. Pike, for example, is going to be fine. So is Spock, Uhura, Mbenga, Chapel. You have ancillary characters like Amanda Grayson, she's gonna be fine. Cybok, we might have only seen his back, he's going to be fine. Technically, Corby, for all, you know, is going to be fine for a while. Those characters, all safe. Sam Kirk, Jim Kirk. The only ones there can be any peril for are La'an Ortegas, #1, because although of course she does have a story in the expanded universe, we haven't seen on screen what happens with her. Marie Battelle, characters like this, new characters created for Strange New Worlds. If you like, Beto Ortegas. So when you put established TOS characters in peril, you know they're going to be fine. It's just a problem of prequels in general. I think it's kind of hard to marry that, if you will, with any kind of overt risk. And sometimes then the problem is not that it forgets that, but it perhaps doesn't embrace that as much as it should. As I say though, despite the lack of risk entirely, the question to Pike, that's an up. You know, have you seen anyone die? And how he answers that. Up as well to Uhura volunteering. Because it is Uhura, that is what she would do. She would volunteer to attempt to communicate with the Jikaru. I do like the inclusion of the line where she says, Elena Cho died doing what she believed in. It's what I believe in too. I like that. That sells. I think Celia sells that for me. At this point, we get the reveal, if you like, that the Jikaru wants to die. that they have been bioengineered into a weapon that the Lutani plan to use against the Khazar. That itself, there's a whole mess of ethical conundrums there. Pike uses this analogy where, you know, he had a horse when he was 14 who fell and broke a rib. The rib went straight into its lung, and painful as it was, Pike did what he had to do. He had to put it down. Pike has pretty bad luck with horses. Because if you go back to A Quality of Mercy, when Admiral Pike speaks to Captain Pike, and the way he convinces him that he is who he is, he talks about his first pony, Sir Nazelot, who broke a leg and had to be put down as well. Maybe Pike's not the person to be leading this mission, especially when they arrive way too quickly at the decision to kill the Jikaru. Now, it's framed as though the Jikaru itself requests to be put out of its misery. But what is the message we're putting across here? That someone who has been tortured, who has been altered to a state where they are a weapon, that there is no hope for them? That all you can do is put them out of their misery and hope that nobody visits that same torture on their children? It's a very mixed message, and I must say I don't like it. So flying the Jikaru toward the sun, communicating with it, it's as emotional as it is, and thanks in large part to Celia's performance in this scene, is dark. It's dark, perhaps darker than Star Trek intended to go in this episode, but unfortunately there are just too many parallels of prisoners of war being so affected by what they went through that perhaps they didn't see another way out. This one stayed with me, but not for positive reasons. That is a down from me. There is a nice inclusion. So this is between Uhura and Beto. We're sort of wrapping up now at this point. She does speak about the fact that Starfleet has the resources to help in situations. And although, I'm going to come back to this now, but I want to quickly say, if not us, then who? That is a very Star Trek question, and that is definitely an up from me. And I think it's a question that needs to be asked, and I think particularly that it was Uhura asking the question as well. That was good. My down here is, I do think you're brave asking these questions. No one should accept anything at face value. That's all I was doing, is I just wanted the truth. I believe that's what you think you were doing. And the reason that is a down is because I don't believe it's true. It feels placating. It feels patronizing. It feels like, oh, you're right to ask these questions, but it's done now. We've done this. We don't need to do this again. And that's frustrating, because everything is on a case by case. I mean, there's so many examples from the original series right up to Strange New Worlds where there's episodes where Starfleet was the greatest force for good in the galaxy, and those episodes where it was not the greatest force of good in the galaxy. What does it do here? It comes in and it doesn't help the situation between the Lutani and the Khazar. It takes the Lutani's weapons away. Now, I'm not saying it was wrong for stopping the Lutani for using a sentient being as a weapon of mass destruction, but what's Starfleet doing here? And if we go back, what was that line about? Deliver the weapon or take it? Was that Starfleet saying it was going to step in and take a weapon of mass destruction that is then a sentient being that's been bioengineered? The message or lack thereof in this episode, tied in with the placating, good for you for asking, have a sandwich, go to bed. Trellium down. I considered going trilithium down. I did. And I'm going to leave it as Trellium down. I think this episode set out with a purpose. I don't think it achieved its purpose because I don't think it does anything. We are given so many different messages with very few resolutions, which itself could have been an interesting episode. That there are questions without answers. That could have been interesting. But instead, there's this patronizing air that runs throughout that I don't think settles in any kind of ironic way. And that, to me, left a very sour taste in my mouth. Bringing back that scene from the beginning of the episode, we're shutting down your project, and believe me, you don't need the Federation as your enemy. That scene, even in the context of when we see it, is not recontextualized. That's a down. It is a down for me, I'm afraid. I do want to bring up something, actually. I spoke to Ellie, because we did our What the Hell Just Happened video, and Ellie had a very different reading of this as well, which was really interesting, and she focused pretty much entirely on the Jikaru's plight. And I really, really like that, you know, like, well, I am obviously very bogged down in a lot of what else is going on in the episode. She looked at it from, this was an animal suffering that they helped to put out of its misery while also then taking care of its family. And that feels, I don't like how it was done, but that does at least feel a bit more Starfleet. A little bit more, we will look for the good in the bad. We will look for the light in the dark. And I think it is important to highlight that as well. That even though how we got there may not have been so satisfying, what we did with it ended up being satisfying. Or at least semi-satisfying to some people. But I wanted to make sure that we mentioned it there as well. Mentioned as well about light and the dark. Una makes a comment toward the end that somebody once said space is cold and dark and full of death. And she talks about wanting to bring light and warmth and to bring life. Well, that's an up from me, because that is a beautiful message anyway. And also, it really parallels something that William Shatner said upon his return after his mission up into space. That when he was up there, he saw the dark and the cold, that there was a black emptiness, that, you know, all he saw was death. And as dark as that is, it was about appreciating the life around you. And Una being the viewpoint character to say that here, that was good for me. There's obviously the other reference, which I am good. There was obviously cetacean observations as well, so there is another reference to that, but that merited a big mention here. I want to give an up, by the way, to the Bolian birthday, because I like Bolians. He's getting it up from me. Down. It's a bit like a sitcom at the end. You know, everyone's sitting there having dinner and pikes. Ha ha ha, isn't this wonderful? Yeah, that was completely the wrong tone for the end of this episode. Up. What is Starfleet? The message. The people make Starfleet, not the other way around. Down. What is Starfleet? The episode. The execution. It did not work for me. Mockumentaries can and do work, and the fact that they've got mock in the title doesn't necessarily mean it has to be a comedy. I know there is obviously many comedies. Think of Panorama's Spaghetti Tree mockumentary from the 1950s the BBC ran. Like, they've been doing this for a while. But also, Paranormal Activity is a mockumentary. The Office, which, okay, is a comedy, is a mockumentary. But this one is it feels very teen angst. This one didn't really work for me. Star Trek, even within the Star Trek community, there are other examples of this really interesting idea, which is this talking heads alongside footage. Prelude to Axanar, which I know is a hot button topic. I know that. But it did this very well, cutting in between footage and interviews with talking heads. It's something that I know Power 543 Films, Sam Cockings and the Trek Yards lads, that they are doing as well, and doing quite well. And it is something that I would like to see more of. Although I'm aware I have not been the most joyous person going through this week's episode, I know that. But I like the idea. I don't like what we got, but I don't want them not to do another one. You know, I would not like this to be the only one, and I think there is good in that. I like finishing on what Uhura says, and with that, and thank God probably says a lot of people here, we're going to bring the episode to a close, and we're going to go to cetacean observations. Let's talk about the Enterprise itself in the beginning. Constitution class heavy cruiser, as we know, 190,000 metric tons. Yep, that's straight away from earlier on. 203 crew members, it says here. Well, in Discovery, it's lost 200 crew between Discovery and now. But also, it was at war then, so that makes sense. Confirmed that it was built at the San Francisco shipyards. Yes, it was. Named for the aircraft carrier Enterprise as well, according to the plaque. In the beginning, there's a red shirt explosion montage, which I thought was quite funny. Reused footage from Season 2, Episode 6, Lost in Translation. From Season 1, Episode 2, Children of the Comet. That's when Uhura's in the EVA suit. We also then have footage from Season 1, Episode 1, Strange New Worlds, when we see the Enterprise leaving space dock. Also behind them is a Shepard class and a Malachowski class. The Shepard class with the original Discovery nacelles, as opposed to the updated ones seen in Season 3 of Strange New Worlds. Spock's story about his childhood as well, also juxtaposed with the fact that he seems to be doing Shahmura, which is a type of Vulcan calisthenic. This actually comes from a script of Breaking the Ice from the episode of Enterprise, that T'Pol was going to be doing this in the opening of the episode. Now, it ended up being something different in the episode. They talked about his friend Sobrek. Now, he was told not to play with Spock due to his half-human nature. This ties back into some of Amanda's stories, but also things we've seen with Spock in the past. He then ran away to the Plane of Blood, which we previously saw in Enterprise's The Forge. There's references to Serac, to well, they don't talk about Cyranoids here, but in The Forge, the Cyranoids were hiding out there. Also, then we have the reveal of Spock's lute, which has that, you know, the F that you see on violins. I like that. That was a nice touch as well. References to my father, obviously being Sarek of Vulcan. There is an item in Ortegas's workshop quarters that looks very like a lightsaber. Just thought I'd throw it there. La'an talks about being slashed by a Kalaran blade. Well, the Kalaran system we saw in Star Trek Nemesis. Sometimes we attack first. Well, I'm sure they learned that lesson from the Battle of the Binary Stars and the Vulcan Hello. The 23rd century phaser range, this is, and then there's also references to, you know, now that we've learned from the Gorn, get shifting. Either destroy them first or get out of there. Uhura's comm badge, think about the last time we saw Philippa Georgiou's comm badge, was the first time we saw that itemized thing on the back of it there. At one moment, Pike gets frustrated and tries to slap Ortegas' camera away. Turn that damn thing off, just makes me think of Kirk from the bridge at the Enterprise B. All Vulcans who study the teachings of Serac experience hypersensitivity. Well, Serac, of course, being the father of modern Vulcanism, and of course mind melds, all of that going back to Enterprise and before. Chapel says they should try quadriline on the Lutani, quadriline being previously used on the TNG episode First Contact, not to be mixed up with the film. Mbenga's codename of the Ghost, we've seen that before, things like Under the Cloak of War, Protocol 12, the Battle of Chikara, the Battle of Jigal, the Cayuga, which of course was destroyed over Parnassus Beta. References to Pike's upbringing with horses as well. Spock talks about again, mind meld Serac. In the science lab, while talking, Chapel mentions psionics. That is something that Vulcans experimented with in earlier times. If you remember the Next Generation episode Gambit, you had the psionic resonator, or the Stone of Gaul, that was being used by extremist Vulcans to get basically foreigners off their land. Some of the writing in Ortegas' quarters, Erica Ortegas, now it's similar to, I'm not saying it is this, it's similar to writings of Iconians and the Komar. Well, the Iconians being extinct by now and the Komar being in the Delta Quadrant, probably not them, but it reminded me of that style of writing. The shuttle later on is of course the famous Galileo shuttle. Poor Pike having bad luck with horses, that is a reference back to A Quality of Mercy. Makes me feel bad, to be honest. We already referenced the fact that Una's speech is a bit similar to William Shatner's, but also, of course, Carl Urban's McCoy in Star Trek 2009. Space is disease and darkness wrapped in... I've got the quote wrong, but you know the one. Nice to see a Bolian, and nice to see Batel. Folks, thank you so much for watching along. You probably noticed I was a bit hard on this episode, and I feel it was one of those episodes, it could have done better. I think there is good here, there are ups. It wasn't my favorite of the season. Now we've 3 episodes left in season 3, 8, 9, and 10, so I'm looking forward to going through all of them with you. Thank you so much everyone for joining me, and thank you so much everyone for watching along. You are awesome and wonderful. Please make sure that you're following us on the various socials. We are at TrekCulture, at TrekCultureYT. Until I talk to you again, live long and prosper. To all of my friends out there in the world, stay safe. Know that you are loved, know that we are thinking of you, and know that we will always and forever want peace in this world. Thank you so much. Good night.